The worst, best book ever. The time has come to talk about A Little Life. Welcome to the Big Scary Book Club, where we read the intimidating books together. For those who are new here, Big Scary Books are any books that have been on your TBR for ages because they are big, as in like many pages, but obviously for A Little Life, physically large also applies, or they are intimidating, maybe they're classics, maybe the language is challenging, they're hard to get into, or maybe the subject matter is just hard. Quickly before we start, I just want to address the elephant in the room, which is I ran 16 kilometers today. I was pausing for applause. For this book club, a lot of the questions and discussion points are taken from the Booker Prize Guide to A Little Life. I'll put the link in the bio. I really recommend it as a resource for reading the book. It has a lot of kind of quotes, the headlines from the critics, as well as discussion points and questions, obviously for a book club, and it also has like authors' insights. But this book has been very widely discussed, and especially with the play coming out recently. So there are now just tons of interviews that you can read, and I recommend it. I've done a bit of reading. A lot of Yanagihara, the author's interviews, are very interesting because she is quite a unique person, and I think her background and the way she talks about the book provides a lot of important context to the book. What is A Little Life about? A Little Life is about four friends who live in New York, and the book starts just as they've graduated college and follows maybe 50 decades on from that, so it encapsulates a large period of time. The absolute first thing that I noted about A Little Life that was quite interesting and leads us to our first question is the little blurb really implies it kind of pretty evenly follows the lives of the four friends, and it really doesn't. Jude is absolutely the focus from part 2 onwards, and that's actually the first book club question, which is that part 1 of the novel focuses on the post-college life of four main characters, Jude, JB, Wilhelm and Malcolm, before the narrative dramatically shifts in part 2 to focus almost entirely on Jude. Through this shift, Yanagihara slowly reveals details of Jude's past and his coping mechanisms for dealing with this in the present. How does this narrative shift affect the reading experience? Why do you think the author chose to dramatically shift, alter the focus of the narrative in such a way? So I think in part this is just scene setting. You want to understand each person in Jude's life, like their place and their personalities a little bit deeper before diving into your kind of protagonist. But I also think that the dramatic shift is a way of really forcing the reader upon Jude. You almost get this whiplash because suddenly, without warning, you are intensely focusing on Jude, and you know, with each 100 pages or so, you're just learning more and more about his life, when you know that he's a very private person. From those pages where, the early pages where you have all the friends being delved into kind of evenly, it's already established that Jude's a really sort of camera shy, private person with a lot of secrets. You know, JB, the artist, takes photos of him and he's really not happy with that. And so I think the author is doing this intentionally to make you feel uncomfortable for the way that you are imposing yourself on Jude's life. And that's why the shift is done so dramatically, so kind of abruptly, because it's just so jarring and invasive, and you sort of get lulled into a false sense of security as well. You know that bad things happen, but I wouldn't say it gets really bad. I mean, it's bad throughout, don't get me wrong, but it gets really, really kind of grisly about halfway through, and by that point you're kind of already locked in. And to be honest as well, these like shifts are a part of why I really enjoyed the book. Just because we are on the topic, I want to talk about my favourite part of the book, which is all of the chapters that are narrated by Harold. They again are introduced quite abruptly. It's actually unclear that it's Harold's voice, and again you sort of work out that he is talking to Wilhelm, but a lot of questions are pretty unanswered until very late on in the book as to like why we have this Harold perspective. But I do find that the Harold perspective, whether it was meant to or not, provides this really nice respite, because first of all, Harold is a really lovely character. He's very gentle and loves Jude, and he's meant to be the kind of first person who shows Jude this kind of love, and so we love him for that. But having these chapters from his perspective are also quite soothing, because he's talking in the past tense, so although you don't know what has happened, it gives you a little bit of distance from the like grueling story that is happening in the present. And I'm really curious as to whether these chapters, like whether that was one of the intentions of these chapters, because I know from reading that there was a lot of like discussion and arguments with the editor as to quote unquote how much a reader could take, and I know that I personally found that these chapters were like a bit of a breath of fresh air, even if they weren't necessarily full of positive stuff. They just soothed my soul a little bit and made the story more bearable. When published, The Atlantic called A Little Life an astonishing and ambitious chronicle of queer life in America, in an article titled The Great Gay Novel Might Be Here. Despite this, Yanagihara stated in a recent interview with The Standard that writing a gay novel was never a sort of intention, and that it was just who the characters happened to be. Is it fair to term A Little Life a gay novel? How central to the novel is the character's sexuality, and what relevance does it bear? So I'm really in two minds about this question, and this is one of my criticisms of Yanagihara, because she is not a gay man. If you're someone who's not experienced that, to kind of accidentally end up, or to say in an interview that you just kind of ended up writing the characters that way, is a little bit like, I'm interested to understand more from her as to like what she means by that. Like, is that how the characters developed, but she did actually, you know, once she found the characters were gay, did she then make sure it was fully thought out? Or is she trying to say that, oh, that just happened, I wanna know more? Because I know that there has been some criticism around her fixation with writing really characters who've experienced really grisly things and them just being gay men. And I know specifically she also has a bit of a fascination with men and how men deal with trauma, which, you know, it's like, this stuff should be written, but I think the angle, like, it's a really fine line, and you want to be really intentional, especially if you're not someone who belongs to these groups. Sorry, and in answer to the actual question, because that wasn't an answer to the actual question, Chloe, I think that their sexuality is very important. The book is just all about detail, like that's the whole thing. Yanagihara talks about how she wanted to turn everything up a notch, or like up to a maximum. It's meant to be an uncomfortable level of detail. That's like one of the main points of the book. So a character's sexuality being like an unimportant detail, I just, like, knowing what the author said about it, that doesn't make sense to me. Before publication, Yanagihara's editor suggested she should cut back on some of the darker histories of Jude's childhood. Since its release, A Little Life has been critiqued for these explicit depictions of abuse and even classed as torture porn by one reviewer. Consequently, some readers have found its graphic nature unsettling, discuss whether the debate around the novel being exploitative is valid. So I've obviously already mentioned some of my feelings around this. I think that, and I was wrestling, I think I will forever wrestle with this idea, because I found it like really disturbing. I think most people did, and I think especially when the detail for, I was a bit like, if this were a film, I would have turned it off. It would have felt like a gratuitous level of detail. So I'm trying to reconcile, like, how is that more okay if it's in a book? I don't really think so. I read a really interesting take on this actually in a New Yorker article. That was, Yanagihara's rendering of Jude's abuse never feels excessive or sensationalist. It's not included for shock value or titillation, as is sometimes the case in works of horror or crime fiction. Jude's suffering is so extensively documented because it is the foundation of his character. And I found that just made me, the cogs were turning even more, because I do actually get that to an extent, but I still don't feel like it makes, I feel like it's not good enough still as an explanation, because okay, maybe it's not gratuitous, maybe it's not there just to, like, for the drama and to grab your attention, but is it better if it's there because it's the whole point of the book, and because it's like all that your character is made up of is their suffering? It's kind of dehumanizing. Again, maybe that's the point. But yeah, I just thought that was a really interesting take, because it's phrased as though like, oh, people criticize it because they say it's unnecessary, but it's actually not. It's like so necessary, because that was the entire point. I'm kind of like reading that like, great, I guess, that's good, that's even better. Because maybe the whole character is created in part for shock value, which feels like I'm doing the book a disservice, because it is incredibly well written. But yeah, as I said, she talked about how she wanted everything turned up a little too high. And I think it's a reason why some people love the book and why everyone is talking about it, because it's pretty unique and it's pretty special to have a novel have you that close to so much relentless violence. Yeah, I hope, I guess, like, I get it in a sense for the art, but I'm also like, maybe if people didn't make loads of art like this, maybe a few art pieces, but not, can we not just completely desensitize ourselves? I guess a part of my shock is the audience response to it. I think people they just love it. They just love the pain, and people are clearly like quite excited by reading about this much suffering, and it's a part of why people love the book so much. They have a bit of a badge of honor around having read A Little Life and having like got through it, and I know that like I've probably used language that suggests that, and I just think it speaks to a bit of a wider issue of how quickly people are happy to be okay with this sort of stuff, and turn it into just this like entertainment piece. And even like people talk about how you have to read this book, and I don't think you do. It's an incredible book, it's so well written, the characters are so compelling, but like if you don't feel like you want to read about all that pain, I don't think you have to do it to understand X or to see the world in this kind of way. If you don't want to read it, or you're a little bit scared, maybe don't read it. In an interview with Vulture, Yanagihara said that she wanted to create a character who never gets better, while exploring the idea that there is a level of trauma from which a person simply can't recover. I do believe that really we can sustain only a finite amount of suffering. To what extent does this feel realistic? Does Yanagihara's depiction of a person struggling with the legacy of childhood trauma feel true to life? I do sort of agree with her. She describes therapy as like all other medical treatments, which is sometimes it doesn't work. That makes sense. I get that as a point. And I think it sort of is realistic, depressingly. I really didn't want to agree with her on this one. And especially because the Jude never ends up really giving therapy a go, or really opening up to people fully, and all the ways that you're kind of told will help you out. It feels like Jude finds himself unable to ever fully commit to that. And then I do think you also end up with these setbacks, you know, when JB said that terrible thing to Jude. I think that's an example of like a real turning point. I do think though the crash, sorry, I'm now thinking back to my whole thing of like bad things happening. The crash in which one of his only and best friends, plus the literal love of his life and only person he's ever opened up to ever, die. That felt a bit ridiculous. I think it was at that point where I was like, this is just silly. And I feel like Yanagihara obviously was like determined for him not to have a happy ending, but she could have done it in a way that was a bit more realistic. I guess car crashes are really common, but it was like, really? All the bad things are gonna happen to him? Really? It had to be like that character, the only character he's ever felt safe with. One pearl of wisdom that I did actually enjoy from her when I was reading, I think this is from a Guardian article, I'll link that too. So she says she thinks the book is a bit of a parable of adulthood, which begins as something full of social possibility and narrows to something increasingly introspective. In the end, you are really left on your own. If you look at the friends who come in and out of Jude's life and how they are not able to really save him, that part is, I think, an accurate reflection of my adult life, and no doubt a lot of people's. I do think this speaks to a truth. Friends can only get you so far, and like, I think she writes about that really, really well. The writing is beautiful, by the way. Have I mentioned that? Because I feel like I'm complaining a lot, but it's pretty stunning. It's really, really beautifully written. I have so many quotes. I'm not even gonna bother trying to like take you through them, because I have so many quotes that I love from this book. While the novel is set in modern times in New York City, it is very light on any wider specifics such as socio-political or historical events. Why do you think Yanagihara has chosen to omit such detail? Is there a benefit to this? I've seen loads of commentary about this, like a lot of the critics specifically mention this. To be honest, I didn't really notice that, but I guess I do think that it's written in that way to just intensify the experience. It's such a character-driven story, and it's all about people having their own worlds, and some of those worlds being a lot harder to access than others. So I think not having anything going on in the outside world is just a way of being like, the outside world barely matters. It's all about what's going on in the noggin, you know? A Little Life contains 7 chapters, each with 3 sections. Each subsection contains 18,000 words. When speaking to New Yorker in 2022, Yanagihara revealed the purpose behind the book structure. This scaffolding was there to organise, not to dilute, the story's corrosive emotions. She did not separate the subsections with white space to deprive readers of natural resting places. As a reader, did this structure affect your experience of the book? Upon reflection, did you notice it? And if so, how did it impact you? I didn't really notice this much. I definitely noticed how it was chaptered, and each chapter was a little bit of like the heading told implied things. Like it gave you a little bit of a taste as to what was going to happen. You know, like you have a chapter called The Happy Years, which pretty heavily implies there are going to be sad years after that. Sorry, not a chapter, you have like a section that's called The Happy Years. So I think I noticed it in that sense, and I actually really liked it. I think it's kind of fun and keeps you on the edge of your seat when you have a little sense of what it might be and you're kind of guessing, like, what does this chapter header mean? I think it really stays with you. In terms of the separated subsections, like not having them separated with white space, I didn't notice that at all. I think I was finding the book so relentless anyway, and I was so immersed in the story that whether or not there was white space between the chapters was something I just didn't register, though maybe it still had an effect, I just didn't realise. Jude is legally adopted by Harold and his wife Julia. As a 30-year-old grown man, much of this is symbolic. What is the author trying to depict here? What is the purpose of the adoption? How does it affect Jude? I think this is a really interesting part of the story, and I think she's basically really trying to ram home this whole thing of like, friends and loved ones cannot save you. I think, you know, Harold is this incredibly loving, well-meaning character, and he generally does and says the right things, even at times when you know he is being particularly challenged by Jude, and like the bounds of what he's comfortable with and understands is really being challenged. So he's kind of perfect, like as perfect as a person can be. And when you meet him, though you're wary of it going awry because you just don't trust anything in this book at this point, you are kind of lured into this false sense of security that this is it, you know, this is going to make things better, things are going to get better. And you know, because Jude does also like describe, really there are a lot of positive things, and it's clear that the adoption has these very clear immediate positive effects. So though it does help Jude, you know, learn to trust and like learn to love a bit and experience love, it doesn't save him. And that's like the whole point. The adoption there, I feel like the adoption is just there to be like, how lovely, but it wasn't enough, you know? And you also see how it adds this pressure, and it adds to the guilt that Jude feels. Like Jude is obsessed with the idea that he's deceiving them because they don't know about his past, and it does like increase that weight on Jude and kind of make him in some ways more unhappy. It's just another relationship that he has to put energy into kind of making okay. With regards to the title, finally, we're gonna wrap up soon, don't worry. I think it's a beautiful title. 3-word titles just, they really get me right in the heart. I think it's like the right amount of relatable, but also specific to the character. Like, if you just see that and you know it's set in New York, you know, we're all little rats in our little rat race. But also the title takes on new meaning as you read. Sometimes it's actually alluded to in really gruesome ways. But I think the overarching thing is like Jude regards his own life as small and insignificant because he just hates himself. Or thinks he's kind of nothing. Yeah, and there's something so, like, the word little, like, it's just such a cute way to describe something. So it just heightens the sadness that I feel. And the book's incredibly sad, and the title's sad. And it's also like the book kind of covers, you know, it's a massive book, it covers a whole life. And that's kind of sad because it's like, see Jude, your life was small enough to just fit into a book. So we're now on to the big question that we are all waiting for. That is, was this book as big and scary as I thought it would be? Yeah, the beginning especially, I actually found a bit of a grind. I found it a little bit hard to get into. I think long books just have that effect on me. Like, you're kind of reading it and you're like, where is this going? Like, why is it so long? I'm incredibly grumpy when I know an author has written a super long book, because I'm like, this better be a good use of my time, my precious time. So yeah, it was absolutely as big and scary. If anything, it was scarier than, like, I wasn't prepared, because people just like, I don't know, I guess because they don't want to give spoilers, but I wasn't really prepared for like the amount of gore that would be in this book. You know, people say, oh, it made me cry so much, or like, oh, it's really depressing. But specifically the gore, I don't think gets mentioned enough, and that's what really struck me. So this book is absolutely big and scary. It almost ticks all of the boxes, including secret box number 4, which is physically large. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think about this book. Do not leave me hanging with my thoughts in my own brain. I want to know other people's thoughts. I want to know your thoughts. Thank you for watching. Have a lovely week. Goodbye.